City of Warrenville Community Development and Planning Committee of the Whole regular meeting on Monday, July 8th. Clerk, may I please have a roll call?
Alderman Ashour?
Here.
Alderman Berry?
Here.
Alderman Bevere?
Here.
Alderman Davalos?
Here.
Alderman Goodman?
Here.
Alderman Krischel?
Here.
Alderman Widener?
Here.
Alderman Wilson?
Here.
Thank you. Now, everyone, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I don't see that we have any citizens' comments this evening, so it's time for officials and staff comments. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, a big thank you to all of those that helped make our 4th of July celebration a huge success yet again. Colin Wilkie and his group did a superb job, and Karen Johannick with the parade did also a wonderful job. Special thanks to them for heading up those responsibilities. And of course, for everybody that volunteered and helped to make it a success. We got lucky again with the weather. No complaints from anybody that I heard. It was a delightful time for the parade and the celebration. So thanks again to everyone who helped make that a success and those that participated. A couple of other things. I have a volunteer opportunity on the Tourism and Arts Commission. I have one opening. If you're at all interested in finding out what that's about, send me an email. We'll get you some information to let you know what the responsibility is, what the commitment is, and what the benefit is for your participation. So just one opening. It could be anybody in town. It's a fun group. They do a lot of good work, and I think you would enjoy it. So send me an email if you're interested. The Tourism and Arts Commission. We have several paid positions open for the city. We need a full-time fleet management person. We need a full-time management analyst. And we need a part-time municipal van driver. Applications for those positions are available online. They're also available here if you walk in person at City Hall. So again, those 3 positions that are open and we're seeking to fill: full-time fleet management, full-time management analyst, and a part-time municipal van driver. And that's all I have for this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Anyone else? Alderman Bevere?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I went to the wake for Bob Walters, and he was a great man and really dedicated in everything he did. And just want to say prayers are there for him.
Thank you. Anyone else? City staff? No comments? Okay. Then we'll move on to the business of the meeting. The first item on the agenda this evening is consideration of an agreement with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus to solicit pricing from qualified solar providers. And we have the Public Works Management Analyst, Justin Miller, to provide us with the details on this topic. Justin?
Good evening, Council. Thank you again. Before you tonight is an agreement with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus to solicit pricing from qualified solar providers for a potential community solar subscription for the city. To step back, and this is part of the Mayor's Caucus's Community Solar 2 program, which the city learned about in late 2018. What it does, it allows municipalities to collectively access a simplified procurement process to access the benefits of community solar. And again, I want to also say that in terms of what I'm talking about, we're talking about electrical ComEd accounts that the city has right now. So we're talking street lights, traffic control devices. It only affects city ComEd accounts. To give an explanation of what community solar is, community solar allows what they call subscribers, but in this case I'll just call it municipalities because that's the program we're talking about, to access part of a Illinois solar facility and share the benefits of that facility, to buy into that facility. So you're also gaining the advantage of offsetting all or a portion of the electrical costs from the power produced by the facility. Some additional advantages are that municipalities have gain access to solar without installing infrastructure. You also get to avoid the upfront costs and maintenance costs associated with the solar farm. And again, you're also supporting local solar farms in Illinois. And again, I also want to reiterate that this program is complementary to any kind of on-site solar project that the city may pursue at some point in the future. To explain a little bit of the process of what has happened so far with this program with the Mayor's Caucus, in early 2019, staff submitted a list of the city's ComEd accounts for evaluation with the Mayor's Caucus. They are utilizing a third party called the Power Bureau. They are kind of the point people in this, helping the pool guiding the pool through this entire process. From that evaluation, and again, there was a $500 fee associated with this evaluation. From that evaluation, a number of applicable ComEd accounts were identified as qualifying for a potential community solar subscription. The next step in this CS2 program process is soliciting pricing from qualified solar providers. The agreement for you tonight, just to reiterate, allows the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and the Power Bureau, the organization they're working with, to solicit pricing. It does not obligate the city to enter into any kind of subscription agreement. This is purely to obtain pricing. Once the pricing is obtained, then staff would come back with a recommendation to the council for final approval. And then just a few other key points about the program. The estimated cost of the program, initial estimates of cost savings were between 5 to 15% on electrical costs per year, depending upon how many accounts that we assign to this. I also want to reiterate that there's a lot of flexibility in this as well. We can do anywhere from like a 1-year agreement up to 20 years. There's also 30 to 40 other municipalities in this pool participating. Some local communities participating include Carroll Stream, Bartlett, and Glen Ellen. And again, pricing is expected back for this program by the end of August. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions from the alderman? Alderman Goodman?
Thanks. So, first of all, it mentions that we have 29 utility accounts that are recommended for inclusion. Where does that number come from?
That is looking at all of the ComEd accounts the city has right now. So it could be anything from a street light to a traffic control. It's really what the city's paying on to ComEd for electrical costs, all those different accounts. That's
So-
where.
Every streetlight in town has a different account with ComEd?
No.
What do you mean?
No, it's kind of a smorgasbord. There's not much logic to it. There's might be a handful on one. There could be a certain section of town. I know Cantera is on an entire section itself. So it's all of those of what the city is paying for electrical costs to ComEd for.
Okay. So when we say that we're going to be soliciting bids, what's the nature of the different companies that are going to be submitting a bid? Is this a company that has existing solar installations? Are we talking about building new solar installations to provide energy for municipalities in Illinois that are taking advantage of this? Would it be local? Would our particular source provider be something we could point to? We're getting our energy from this solar farm, or are we talking about something broader like credits?
So to better explain how this community solar program worked, there was a lottery back in April to award tax credits to qualifying solar projects. There were 4 times as many projects as there were available tax credits. So what this would be is this would be a solar farm that's being built in Illinois. I don't know specifically if we could point and say, this is the one that we're collectively buying into per se, and that's in this location. I'm not sure if they haven't explained it that far yet, if that's, but yeah, you are technically buying into a local state of Illinois local solar farm.
Okay, so I guess part of what I'm asking is when you say a community solar program, it brings to mind the concept of like a cooperative where we and some other city all own some facility that has been built with solar panels that, uses or provides as much energy as we're using. Now, I understand this is sometimes complicated and people get confused about, okay, that's produce energy that then is piped here that we use directly or something, which is not how the grid provides power. So we're just talking about offsets.
Correct.
Right.
We're talking about offsets. Yep.
Okay, so if we do move forward with this program, how are we going to communicate this to the public? Because I think people would really be interested. I know that, for instance, today, the American Bloom judges are in town, which is why our lovely clerk is not here today. And this is exactly the sort of thing that's right up their alley and that they would be super psyched about.
There is going to be, I don't know if it started yet, there is a separate process for consumers to be able to buy into these. I'm not sure if it's rolled out yet. I know it was supposed to be rolling out sometime this summer, but that would give residents in Warrenville the ability to do basically the same thing that what we're doing is collectively buying into a solar farm and gaining the offsets and the benefits of that.
Okay, I mean, we do have municipal aggregation already for residential
Correct.
and commercial electric bills, but we weren't using the municipal aggregation program for the city's electric bills, or this is going to be removing the city's electric accounts from the municipal aggregation program? How do those two things interact?
That's kind of what we have to figure out. I've been working with Assistant Administrator White and Finance Director Dahlstrand to figure out how you are correct. Some of the city's accounts currently are on the Dynegy contract that you're alluding to, as well as there's some other ones under a different contract where once we get the pricing back, that's what the staff recommendation before we bring it back. We would figure out how this would fit into the inventory of the city's electrical accounts.
Okay, because if the city is no longer using the municipal aggregation program, which we're providing for our residents to use, and we've moved on to something else, then, we need to have that conversation with our residents about what we're doing and why they can't do it too, or why what we're doing is better, or, what we're making available to them. So I think communication on this is going to be important.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Before we move to a motion, I've been advised by the city administrator to include the wording, recommend the city council accept the staff recommendation. So with that, Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council accept the staff recommendation and approve the agreement with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus to solicit pricing from qualified solar providers.
We have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Our next item this evening is consideration to authorize staff to coordinate the preparation and submittal of an open space and land acquisition and development grant application for the Trailhead project. Community Development Director Ron Menser will provide us with this information. Ron?
Good evening and thank you. You may recall that back in 2016, the city applied for and was successful in its attempt to secure a surface transportation program grant commitment for the Trailhead project that we've been discussing out here in front of City Hall along the Illinois Prairie Path. That grant was a $377,000 commitment. Based on that commitment, the city went forward and more recently engaged the services of a landscape architectural firm and civil engineering firm to develop the preliminary engineering design documents for the project, the documents that would ultimately be necessary to submit to IDOT for approval as part of the STP grant funding process. We recently had our initial kickoff meeting for that project with the various stakeholders that are involved in reviewing and advancing the preliminary design documents. One of the members brought everybody up to speed that there is a relatively new grant award or grant opportunity that's been made available through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. It's the Open Space Land Acquisition and Development Program. And it was this individual's opinion that the Trailhead project would fit very well within the ranking criteria of that grant program. So it was the collective feeling of the stakeholders group that it would be desirable for the city to attempt to secure an OSLAD grant that would help provide supplemental funding for the project should we ultimately implement it. Under the OSLAD program, engineering design costs could be paid for. An OSLAD grant could cover part or all the costs associated with the implementation of the Illinois Prairie Path Heritage Display component of the project, which is not something the city is committed to fund at all, and it's not covered under the STP funding commitment we have, but is certainly a nice additional amenity for the overall project. The OSLAD grants could also be used to upgrade the proposed bathroom and pavilion facility to be maybe more aesthetically or architecturally attractive. It would also potentially allow for funding for additional upgrades to the current electrical system that is in place in that area of the community and supports the special events that are held in that area. If we're going to make major modifications, this would be the time to make modifications to the electrical system. And then finally, last but not least, the OSLAD grant could cover some additional costs that we may incur in moving the Prairie Path more than what we were originally anticipating based on some of the feedback that we've recently received from the Park District in order to continue to try to effectively accommodate the Summer Days event in that area of the community. One of the concepts that the stakeholders group has been talking about is the possibility of adjusting the location of the Prairie Path more than what was preliminarily or shown on the conceptual drawings, and there's certainly would be an additional cost to that. So when it's all said and done, the group felt that there was little downside to the city moving forward with a grant application. The grant application deadline is August 19th. We have already secured one grant and prepared a grant application for the STP program, so we have quite a bit of documentation. And one of the stakeholder group members is very experienced in achieving or acquiring OSLAD grants, so he's volunteered to provide some services and assistance in putting together the grant. So we think we can do it pretty efficiently with really no outside additional costs. So it is the collective recommendation of that group, which staff concurs with, is to have the city council ultimately authorize staff to go through and prepare and then submit that grant application to the OSLAD grant program.
Questions? Alderman Goodman.
Not a question exactly. In the past couple of years serving on the Summer Days Committee, I have been asked repeatedly that the next time this came before us, I should mention their concern about the Summer Days issue with the trailhead plan, and I'm glad to see that you've already taken that into consideration in this request. But I just wanted to pass that along since I've been asked many times to pass that along. So I'm glad that you're on top of it and you don't even need me. Thank you.
Alderman Davalos.
Thank you. I just want to ask a couple questions on the total process. So do we have a final amount that this is going to cost? I mean, now that I'm hearing about maybe moving the Prairie Path, I'm thinking it's a estimate, it's kind of a moving target. Has that been figured out?
Well, we did talk about as part of the concept plan that was prepared and presented to and ultimately endorsed by the city council. I think the project was estimated to be in total about a $550,000 project based on the conceptual plans. And there were some monies earmarked for different things like the bathroom and pavilion facility. It was kind of a budget, $120,000. I don't remember the exact number, but like $120,000 was allocated for that component of the project. And that was expected to support kind of a prefab building that might have some architectural aesthetic enhancements done to it, but there was some discussion by the city council when we presented that, at least by some of the members, that maybe we can look at even taking that to a higher level and replicating some kind of maybe a train station type design. It would certainly not fit within that $120,000, or let's assume it was $120,000. So this is this grant would free up potentially more funds to make those additional type of enhancements. So we don't know the exact cost of the project. We'll have a much better idea once we complete the preliminary engineering design phase of the project. Right now, the consultant team that's working for the city is out gathering. I don't know if they're out this week or next week or last week, but at this point in time, one of the things they're working on is obtaining a more detailed survey of the area, of all the location of all the existing physical improvements and the topography of the area, so that they can more carefully create preliminary engineering design and then attach prices to that design.
Okay, and there's some other money that we were told about before, things like the Illinois Prairie Path Association donating some money, and perhaps the county and perhaps the Forest Preserve and all that stuff. So I guess that's sort of, everybody's kind of waiting to see what.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a whole lot of opportunity with the Forest Preserve District. The county may contribute some funds. The Prairie Path is one of their physical improvements that they own and maintain. The Illinois Prairie Path Association did represent that they had collected like $30,000, I think it was $30,000 in donations that they could use to help fund the installation of their Illinois Prairie Path Heritage display in the project. Now, that display has a price tag that's, roughly probably $90,000. So their money isn't enough to cover even what they would like to have installed in the project. And then again, that's another reason why this grant opportunity might help us fill the gap that they are looking to try to fill in some form or another.
Thank you.
Alderman Berry?
The modifications to the Prairie Path, is the Prairie Path people, are they in favor of this? And do we know exactly what this is going to cost?
We don't know what it will cost until we work through the preliminary engineering design process, and they are aware of the possibility that it would be potentially moved. One of the members of the stakeholder group that's guiding the work of the consultant team is a staff member with the DuPage County Division of Transportation, and that's the group that's responsible for the maintenance of the Prairie Path, and ultimately would help facilitate whatever permits the city would need to obtain in order to make any adjustments to the property in that area that's owned by the county, including the path itself.
So we'd only be moving the Prairie Path because the summer days, it doesn't fit in summer days.
Part of it would be moved already under the conceptual design to accommodate some of the improvements that the city had proposed, or the work group had proposed as part of the concept plan that the city council had previously reviewed and approved or endorsed. So it's basically that the adjustment that was previously presented could be adjustment could be increased in scope to more effectively accommodate the summer days event.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? I'd just like to add that the county, in a sense, is giving the city the land to put the project in place of where the train station used to be. So in a
Yes.
sense, we have 3 partners all contributing significant amounts of money besides the grant money that you've accumulated. Illinois Prairie Path has stepped forward, and they're willing to develop this interpretive kiosk highlighting their history. And then DuPage County has stepped forward and provided the land space for us to build the Trailhead project. And then together with the grant that you've secured and the recommendation from the member of the stakeholder group, who we should give thanks to, that's Rob Spurl. He's president or head of the Friends of the Warrenville Parks organization, as well as being Illinois Prairie Path board member, has been very involved and very supportive of this project. And without his help, we may not have otherwise known about this grant. So we thank Rob for his involvement with that. Thank you. Anyone care to make a motion on this? Alderman Goodman?
I would like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council authorize staff to coordinate the preparation and submittal of an open space land acquisition and development grant application for the proposed Trailhead project.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Third item on the agenda tonight is the consideration to conduct a public hearing for various proposed zoning ordinance text amendments. And Ron Menser will provide us with the information we need on this topic. Ron?
Typically, once or twice a year, staff works with the Plan Commission to evaluate potential amendments to the zoning ordinance that are designed and intended to either incorporate what's more prevalent best practices from a municipal zoning regulation standpoint into the city's ordinances, or to fix things that may have become outdated or not accurately and effectively addressed in our current zoning ordinance. At this point in time, staff is recommending the City Council authorize staff and the Plan Commission to conduct a public hearing to evaluate text amendments to 4 different components of the zoning ordinance. Probably the easiest one is residential lot coverage. That's the limitations on the percentage that people can cover on their property, the percentage of their property they can cover with some type of structure. The Plan Commission's interested in exploring possible adjustments to those regulations that might encourage people to use permeable pavement by basically counting permeable pavement surfaces at a lesser rate than 100% in the calculations of lot coverage. The second area that we're looking at making some modifications and updating the ordinance in is parking lot lighting requirements. About 20 years ago, the city hired an engineering firm to perform an in-depth analysis of the best practices for lighting regulations, and we developed a pretty extensive set of lighting regulations that were then incorporated into the zoning ordinance. At this point in time, though, those lighting regulations, from a staff perspective, haven't kept up with modern-day technologies. They don't account for LED-type illumination. Some of the photometric illumination requirements can be more restrictive, meaning could be requiring more illumination than what current practices suggest is necessary for safety reasons. And in other cases, the regulations have turned out to be overly restrictive as it relates to certain types of installations that really need a higher level of lighting, like under a gasoline pump canopy. So what we're suggesting is we work with that same consulting firm to evaluate best practices from a lighting regulation standpoint, and incorporate those into recommendations that will be brought forward for council consideration after a public hearing at the Plan Commission level. This one would require some outside consulting assistance. We do have money in this year's budget to cover that assistance. That is not expected to exceed $5,000 in engineering consulting assistance. Probably one that's gotten the most press of late is regulation of recreation cannabis businesses. With the state of Illinois making those types of businesses legal come the first of the year, it's necessary and appropriate from a municipal perspective to evaluate how we're going to allow, prohibit, regulate those types of businesses. So in order to do that within the zoning ordinance, we have to go through a public hearing process, invite public input, and then make recommendations again to the city council on how to do that. Along with that, not necessarily addressed in the agenda packet backup, is a sister issue that I wanted to call your attention to that came up after the packet was produced, and received some additional information from the city attorney's office today. And the city attorney's office is recommending that all of its municipal clients who are going to deal with this particular issue from a regulatory standpoint, and they're recommending all their clients deal with it, pass what they call a red flag resolution in the very near future. And the red flag resolution is designed to put these types of businesses on notice publicly that the city is actively evaluating how it's going to regulate these these types of businesses from a zoning perspective, from a licensing standpoint, and from a taxation standpoint. So unless the council has any objections, the city attorney's office has already created a resolution, and she's recommending it, or they're recommending that the council consider passing that resolution as soon as possible. So it would be staff's intent to include that resolution on the next city council agenda for council consideration. And then finally, last but not least, we've typically, it becoming more prevalent for us to grant variations to the existing parking requirements that are contained in the zoning ordinance. For the most part, those parking requirements are fairly old from a staff perspective, and I think the Plan Commission agrees that in many cases they're somewhat antiquated based on data that's really no longer consistent with actual parking needs. So in many cases, the parking requirements in our ordinance require more parking than actually what is necessary. And therefore, we're granting variances to allow for lower parking ratios than what's contained in our ordinance. The problem is that when you put those parking requirements in your ordinance and you enforce that ordinance and people don't want to go through the special approval process to grant a variance, we're basically requiring people in many cases to install more asphalt than what's really necessary. And from a quality of community character standpoint, a lot of unused parking asphalt really doesn't do anybody good. It doesn't generate a whole lot of tax revenue, certainly doesn't generate as much tax revenue as buildings would generate. It generates stormwater runoff. It contributes to the heat island effect. It costs the private developer money to put in and then maintain. So ultimately, we're taking a closer look at our residential and commercial parking requirements. What is some of the more current data that's available on what parking requirements should really be in modern day times, and what are the best practices for looking at how to deal with shared parking scenarios to help reduce the overall amount of parking. So ultimately, just to reiterate, we're looking for the council to give the committee to recommend to the council give staff and the Plan Commission authorization to conduct a public hearing to address or to evaluate these 4 issues and bring forward recommendations on potential amendments to the council at a future meeting.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Alderman Goodman?
Thanks. I know that the Plan Commission will consider these issues in more depth, but are pools really permeable?
For about 4 to 6 inches, they're permeable. They can collect water, but they're really not permeable in the sense of a permeable pavement that allows water to absorb into the earth. So I'm not sure that that's ultimately one that staff would recommend, but it is something that the Plan Commission wants to have further discussion and evaluate.
Okay. The parking lot lighting issue, I know we've had a couple of residents come to the city council lately to talk about LED parking lot lighting, and is that part of the rationale for this? We're responding to resident concerns?
Some of the residents I've heard are concerned about LED street lighting. I haven't heard LED parking lot lighting, but some of the same concerns do bleed over and would apply to parking lot lighting. We're talking about the color of light. LED lighting has a wide variety or wide range of lighting color, from like a 2200 Kelvin, which is really kind of an orange light, real soft light, to 6000 Kelvin, which is ultra bright industrial, like operating room bright white. And the lighting levels could be similar, but the color of light can have a dramatic impact on the visual perception of how bright that area is and how it fits in. So most of the lights that we have in the community are somewhere around 2400 to 4000 Kelvin, and the color of light's really not addressed in the ordinance at all right now. So we want to make sure that we address that. And if we do, it would make it so that when people install LED lighting, which is the right thing to do from a energy efficiency standpoint, that they're installing a color of LED lighting that is somewhat consistent with what we already have throughout the community.
Okay. My last question is just, what about other general cleanup items? I know we had discussed quick start language that might need some cleaning up, and is that going to be addressed as well, or just the items in
It
this
would be
memo?
just these items, but that is one that we probably should address, because that would be a relatively minor fix, and we should make that clear.
Okay, I'm not sure if I've remembered anything else, but that one
We
did
have a
come to
list,
mind.
and there's some other issues that we've talked about dealing with, but these are the ones we felt that when we take a bite at the apple this time, these are the ones that we wanted to knock out, and maybe early next year into the early 2020, we would come back for a second round, depending on workloads, to deal with another set of revisions at that point in time.
Okay, so no minor other cleanup items?
Not at this point in time.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Other questions or comments? Alderman Berry?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council authorize the Plan Commission to conduct a public hearing to consider potential zoning ordinance text amendments that would address the issues identified in Community and Economic Development Director Menzer's memorandum dated July 2nd, 2019.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries, and we're on to consideration of agreement with Tesca and Associates Incorporated for temporary planner assistance. Director Menser?
You may recall that during the budget process, we had some discussion about including funds in this year's budget that would allow staff to secure the services of a temporary, quote-unquote, consulting planner to assist in processing current development projects, whether that's building permits and reviewing those for zoning compliance, or assisting in processing projects and applications for the Plan Commission. Ultimately, the current year budget included $26,000 worth of funding for that type of consulting assistance. In April, the City Council approved an agreement with GovHR for temporary planning assistance. And we had selected a candidate that we thought was well qualified and would be a good fit for the needs that we have and relate well to our customers. Unfortunately, a week before the candidate was scheduled to begin work with the City of Warrenville, they accepted a full-time job, permanent job with another community in the area. So we've been working with GovHR. We worked with GovHR for a couple months to identify other potential candidates that they have in their stable, you might say. We've interviewed, I think it was 4 additional candidates we interviewed, and what we found is all these candidates are in transition. They're looking for a full-time position. They're working for GovHR on a temporary period of time, and it seems, this is our perception, as if the ones that are most likely to get a job in another position and have not been with GovHR for a long time are the type of people we would want to have working for us. They have good experience that relates well to what we need them to do here, and they have good communication skills, so they would be so most likely they'd be communicating well with our customers. There are some other people that have been with GovHR for a long period of time, but in interviewing those folks, they don't seem like they would be a good match for what we need here in the City of Warrenville. So we've explored some other options. We've talked with a couple different consulting firms. We've talked with another planner that's out of work at this point in time, is thinking about creating her own consulting business. Ultimately, we arrived at Tesca as a good approach going forward. Tesca has a track record with the City of Warrenville. They helped us with our Southwest District Subarea Plan and the TIF 4 plan, redevelopment plan, and our strategic plan. And although those efforts were successful efforts, and we had a good working experience with them. They have a planner on staff that generally does this type of work. She gets assigned to municipalities for 1 or 2 days a week. And as a permanent employee of TESCA, it's most likely that she's not going to be leaving TESCA anytime soon. So any type of tutoring or mentoring or bringing her up to speed with our processes, our systems, and our codes would not be thrown away a month or most likely not be thrown away a month or 2 into the process if she accepted a full-time position somewhere else. She's got a full-time position, and she'd be working for us through her full-time position. The drawback is that the cost of that is more than working with somebody with GovHR. I think we were expecting about a $50 per hour cost with GovHR, and working through TESCA. As a permanent employee, she has benefits through TESCA, so the cost is going to be more, and it's $80 per hour. The good thing it's good and bad. The reality of it from the city's perspective is we haven't filled that position, so we haven't been spending any money on it. So if we can hire this person, we have enough funds in the budget to, even at the $80 figure, to have that person work at least a couple days a week for us through the end of this kind of construction season. And that's what our recommendation is that the council authorize staff and the attorney to negotiate and execute a contract with TESCA that's consistent with the scope of services that's included and outlined in the letter that was included in the agenda backup, which is an accurate reflection of what they need to do for us for an amount not to exceed $25,000.
Thank you. Questions from the council? Alderman Goodman?
So since we did approve the employee leasing agreement with GovHR, do we need to rescind that?
Probably wouldn't be a bad idea, I'm advised.
Okay.
So when we bring forward the action that's requested tonight or recommended tonight, we can bring forward that agreement to rescind it too.
Okay. And the length of time that we would expect is just this construction season?
Through the end of this kind of calendar year, probably. Yeah, this construction season.
Okay. I'm glad that there's enough flexibility in the budget that we can make this happen, because my main comment on this item is that I think we've had a very good experience with TESCA, and particularly working with Michael Blue in the past, who I've worked with personally a couple of times on these projects. We've done, I think, 3 projects with them, plus I attended a class at the IML conference that he taught, and he's always been very impressive and professional in all of the interactions that I think I've had with him, and I hope that the city staff has had with him. So even though I don't think I can speak specifically about Carol, the fact that they structure it in this letter so that Michael Blue is going to be the project manager at no cost to us and provide some oversight is very reassuring to me.
I totally agree.
Other comments or questions? If not, Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council authorize staff to negotiate and execute a contract with TESCA Associates for part-time planner assistance in an amount not to exceed $25,000 and subject to the city attorney's review.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries, and we're on to consideration of the subdivision control ordinance amendments involving subdivision public improvements agreement. And we're just going to shake things up a little bit and have somebody other than Ron talk about this. The senior civil engineer is with us tonight, Christine Hocking. Christine, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Currently, prior to the recording of a final plat, Section 6.08 of the subdivision control ordinance requires the owner or subdivider to properly execute a statement of agreement which regarding their intent to comply with city regulations and the ordinance requirements. City staff also requires the owner to sign a closeout procedures, which outlines the procedures required to close out a project, including as-built, final inspections, and the other steps to reduce the project to a 2-year maintenance term. City staff and the city attorney are recommending to combine essentially these two agreements into one, make it a little simpler for us and for the owner as well. So section 6.08 in the backup material shows that it's being renamed as a subdivision public improvements agreement. And instead of outlining specific items that's required in the agreement, it's more minimum information that's required in the agreement so that the agreement can be tailored specifically to the project. Some projects like the Everton project will have different items that are required as compared to a smaller 4 subdivision type of project. So it will allow city staff and the attorney to tailor it to the specific project that we have upon us. So if there's any questions regarding this amendment, I would take any questions now.
Questions from the council? Alderman Goodman?
So I noticed you mentioned Everton about this, but when I read it, what occurred to me was that it might have come up because of the River Oaks issue?
Specifically, it came up just more recently because of Everton and Lexington Trace. This is typically something that's signed prior to final plat approval. So something with River Oaks, it would have been nice to have something like this in place probably for that subdivision back when that was being put in place. However, we're trying to make sure that this is everything's signed and in one place from now on.
Okay. I mean, I know the language in the agreement seems related to issues like that. Obviously, nothing we do has a retroactive effect to past development. I understand that. But I guess what I'm saying is one of the issues that seemed implicated when the River Oaks Association came forward had to do with ability or inability to provide subject matter expertise in stormwater issues for homeowners associations and improvements that are covered by the language in this agreement. And how we need to sort of take a long-term approach to the many properties in our community that are going to be facing these kinds of problems going forward. So I understand that this document says, okay, we're going to spell it out very clearly that associations have those sorts of responsibilities for the new developments that are being built now and going forward. But I guess my question is, we don't have language quite like this looking backward, correct?
Correct, and I guess this agreement is more for the developers. So it's not for the homeowners associations. It's specifically for the developers and what they need to do in order to close out the project at the end and conform with all of our regulations and subdivision control ordinance requirements.
I understand that, and I know that developers then pass those responsibilities on to associations if there are associations, and that the agreements that the developers make are very important to what rights and responsibilities continue with the property. So it's all related, but yes, I do understand that distinction in the language of this subdivision control ordinance section. I don't know, I guess my question to you is just, have we thought about how it's going to work going forward if different properties in town are subject to, and I know going backward they probably have been subject to different agreements and different language, but how that's going to work in the future?
When the developer creates their declarations and covenants now specifically for that, I guess, owner or HOA or owners association moving forward, we're trying to make sure that, with the stormwater type of items that they are in charge of, the private side is in charge of, that it's specifically outlined in the covenants. We attach an exhibit stating this is private versus public, and included in that right now we have to make sure that there's maintenance for the stormwater detention facilities in that covenant agreement, or it's referenced in the landscape agreement that's also recorded. So we're trying to make sure that there's information in there for the future HOAs or future owners associations that are included in there. I'm also currently also trying to put together a maintenance schedule, which is what I provided to River Oaks Association, that outlines for their specific detention ponds or storm sewer systems, depending on the type. This is the maintenance schedule. This is what you should be looking for, et cetera, which we haven't provided before, but it gives them a little bit more information so that it can help them or guide them in what they need to do for inspections. And I think that's just the first step, providing that information, providing them the means to look up this information and at least have a starting basis for it. But I think it's education first, and then, meeting with the HOA or owners associations, kind of a little bit of hand-holding. But I think if we get that started, then, we won't have these issues moving forward.
That's great. And the one piece of feedback that I would pass along is how important a map is. And this is something I heard from so many of the residents about how great it was to finally see that map with here are all the pipes, and these red ones are the ones that, and I know looking backward, it's very difficult to fix our lack of documentation and to, provide exhibits that didn't exist in the past. So that's why I think in setting forward this process from now on, that it's incumbent upon us to try and be proactive about that.
Correct, right. And it'll
Thank
make
you.
my job easier, too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. So thank you.
Any other comments, questions? If not, Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council pass an ordinance approving an amendment to the subdivision control ordinance public improvements agreement provisions.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Our next item is the status of the Two Brothers Brewing Campus project and the preferred purchaser and developer designation for city property at the northwest corner of Route 59 and Route 56. Director Menser?
You may recall that at the end of last calendar year, the city initiated and went through a process to solicit proposals for the potential sale and development of the 7 acres of vacant property the city controls at the northeast corner of Butterfield and Route 59. At the end of that process, the council identified the proposal that the Two Brothers Brewing Company submitted as the most desirable proposal for the community, and designated the Two Brothers Brewing Company as the preferred purchaser and developer of the city's property, authorized staff to work with the city attorney to negotiate a land sales contract and redevelopment agreement with the Two Brothers Brewing Company for the potential sale and development of the city property, and also allowed authorized the Two Brothers Brewing Company to seek a courtesy review of their development proposal for both their 20 acres of vacant land at the northwest corner of the intersection and the city's 7 acres at the northeast corner. So what I wanted to do is just take a few minutes to make sure that the council is up to speed on the current status of the Two Brothers project and what efforts have taken place since the council authorized or gave them that preferred developer and purchase designation earlier this year. We've had a lot of meetings, but unfortunately the Two Brothers have run into some challenges in securing financing for their development project. While they own the 20 acres of property, they have not been able to secure outside funding and financing commitments that would allow them to move their project. When I say their project, it's really a combination, first and foremost, of the development of their 20 acres, and then kind of the second component would be the purchase and development of our 7 acres in a manner that would coordinate with what they do on their 20 acres. They haven't been able to secure funding that would allow them to take their project design documents to the next step. And they need to take their project design documents to the next step in order to go through the courtesy review process. So since they have not been able to do that development design documentation to the level that they need to, they haven't applied for, and the Plan Commission has not had a courtesy review. In late May, I asked the two brothers about where the status of this project was, and that it was becoming evident that things weren't moving nearly as quickly as they had represented during the RFP process and what was represented to the council earlier this year. And they kind of hem-hawed around. Ultimately, they did submit the undated letter that's included in the agenda backup for this particular item, which just documents that the project is a pretty complex and extensive project that would require a lot of money to move forward. They're actively looking to secure outside funding assistance or financing assistance that would allow them to move forward. They have represented to me both in meetings, telephone conversations, and it's reflected in the letter that they've submitted that they're committed to moving forward with the project. They just can't make any specific time commitments because they don't have the financial commitments to make those time commitments. So what does that mean for us? I think the city has a couple of choices. They could rescind the preferred developer and purchaser designation of our property from the two brothers, or we could let that designation stay in place for the time being and continue to support them on their efforts to secure the outside financing commitments that they need to move forward with the project. From a staff perspective, looking at both of those two alternatives, we had nothing in our work program. We didn't anticipate actively marketing our property. So from my perspective, given the current state of development out in that area of the community, which is super early, people are just moving dirt, I think our property will only become more valuable as time goes on and projects get developed out there. Actual physical buildings get constructed and new residents occupy those buildings. So I'm of the opinion that it makes sense from the community's perspective just to let the preferred developer and purchaser designation ride with the two brothers for the time being, report back to the city council at the very beginning of next year with a more detailed update on where the two brothers are with their project and evaluate whether or not it makes sense to continue to have them be the designated preferred developer and purchaser for our property. That all being said, we don't have any contractual commitment to giving them that designation. It was just an action of the city council by motion that was approved. We didn't commit in writing to them that that was going to be something that they had rights to going forward. So if by chance there's some other developer that does come to the city and expresses interest in purchasing our property at the northeast corner of the intersection, and it seems as if it might be a project that would be good from a community perspective, we could always revisit that anytime this year and say, okay, based on this other interest, two brothers, you need to do X, Y, Z in this time frame, or we're going to remove that designation and move forward with exploring other opportunities for the community with our property. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had an update. If you have any questions, I do my best to try to address where the Two Brothers project is at in the design and approval process. And any questions about them retaining the preferred developer designation that you might have.
Thank you. We're not looking for any motion on this. This is just a informational item, but if there's questions or comments, any commissioner or alderman can make those at this time. Anybody have anything? Okay, I see none, so thank you for the update, and we'll look forward to continuing to extend a cooperative hand to the Two Brothers. Next item on the agenda is consideration of Lexington Homes request for city enforcement of fire lane restrictions on private property. Director Menser?
Items 7 and 8 are virtually identical. They just applied to two different subdivisions, one for the Lexington Trace subdivision, which is item 7, and a second for the Everton subdivision, which is item 8. the fire district has expressed concern about the ability for enforcement of what really needs to be fire lane restrictions on the private motor courts that provide access to the townhouse units in each of those subdivisions that would be rear-loaded townhouse units. And when I say rear-loaded, their garage doors and driveways don't face a public street. They face kind of internal private driveway that has a shared access lane down the middle, and then the driveways tee off of that and access the adjacent garage spaces of each of the individual townhouse units. In that shared access lane and those driveways are located on private property, the city attorney has advised that in order for the city to enforce no parking fire lane restrictions on those private driveways, that the owner of the property, in this case it's the developer of the property, is still the owner of the property, would need to submit a written request to the city council requesting that the city enforce those regulations. And then the city council would ultimately need to pass an ordinance that would document the city's agreement and commitment to enforce those regulations. So that's what's happening here. The developer, we've worked with the developer. They're supportive of the city's efforts to enforce these no parking fire lane restrictions at the request of the Fire Protection District. And the city attorney is prepared to create the ordinance that the city council would need to pass if the city council is receptive to enforcing these regulations. I can tell you that I've spoken with the police chief, and he feels that this is an appropriate action from the city's perspective, that it's a life safety issue, and it would be appropriate for them to have the authority to enforce the no parking regulations in these private property areas. He also went on to share his opinion that he didn't think it was going to require any significant amount of time and energy. I mean, these private property driveway areas will be properly signed to notify people that they are fire lane areas, and most people generally comply with fire lane restrictions, especially if it involves their house. So under item 7, we're recommending that the committee recommend the city council approve an ordinance documenting the city's intent to enforce no parking fire lane restrictions on the private driveway areas within the Lexington Trace project. And on item 8, we're making the same recommendation as it relates to the Everton project.
Thank you. Questions? Does this increase our liability exposure now that we're enforcing regulations on private property?
It could, but it's going to be covered under our tort immunity through the state statutes and our insurance that we have. What's that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So no.
Yeah, not to any significant degree. I think there's ample protections, and it's not uncommon. The city, we do this as a matter of fact in commercial areas. For example, in Target, it's not the same steps and process. We have a private covenant agreement that the previous city attorney developed based on the statutes that apply to municipal enforcement of parking and other traffic regulation issues on private commercial properties, and it's standard practice for us to have the developers and owners of those properties to execute that covenant agreement with the city, and it gets recorded against the property, and it's a standard covenant agreement that was presented to and endorsed by the city council, I don't know, a long time ago. So we already do that. It's just to do it on private residential property, there's an additional step and a different process that we have to follow statutorily to make that all happen and be on sound legal ground if we do enforce those regulations.
Are there other examples of where we're utilizing this in the city? Or is this
On private properties, residential properties?
A new program.
You know, it's a new program based on concerns and requests of the Fire Protection District. So they pointed this out, that they want to make sure that we have the ability to enforce these things properly.
Okay. Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council approve an ordinance documenting the city's intent to enforce no parking fire lane restrictions on private driveway areas within the Lexington Trace project.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unless there's further discussion, we could probably entertain a motion for item number 8, since it's kind of a repeat of item number 7. If you'd care to make that motion, Alderman Goodman?
I would like to make a motion to recommend the City Council approve an ordinance documenting the city's intent to enforce no parking fire lane restrictions on specific private property areas within the Everton project.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries. And the next item is the consideration of city water main easement on Conforti Landon Avenue property. And Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking will update us with this information.
Thank you. As part of the Everton Public Improvements work, MI Homes will place a water main stub on the east or south side of the Illinois Prairie Path. Later this year, the city will construct a water main from this stub and connect to the existing water main on Landon Avenue, completing a looped water main. In order to do this, the city will require a 10-foot water main easement and a temporary construction easement on the Conforti property. Staff has had communication with the Confortis about this project, and they are in agreement that the plat looks good to them. So the plat of easement is included in the agenda backup materials. It's pretty standard plat, but if there's any questions, I'd like to take them at this time.
Questions or comments? Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council pass an ordinance approving the water main plat of easement on the Conforti property and authorize the plat to be executed and recorded at the DuPage County Recorder's Office.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is consideration of license and indemnity easement agreement with MI Homes. Christine Hocking.
Thank you. This is related to item number 9. In order for MI Homes to use the city easement and temporary easement to place the stub on the east side of the Prairie Path, they will have to sign this license and indemnity easement agreement that goes over the rights, responsibilities, and obligations regarding the installation of the stub and use of the city's temporary easement premises. The easement agreement was created by the city attorney. It is included in the backup materials for your information, and I'd like to take any questions at this time.
Questions, comments? Alderman Goodman.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council pass a resolution approving the license and indemnity easement agreement with MI Homes and authorize the city administrator to execute it.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Hocking. Appreciate it. The next item is to review and file the Community Development Department's fiscal year 2020 work program and decision package status report. If anyone has any questions, Alderman Goodman.
When I was at the post office naming dedication ceremony, I got some questions from people about the status of our mailing address change proposal for the Southwest District. And I see that on the update here, it just says staff needs to schedule and conduct a public information and input meeting about the subject. How are we doing on time with that? Is it still going to even be remotely possible to get this done before all the new buildings and addresses are in place for the new developments?
Yeah, it is still possible, and our intent is to schedule that public information and input meeting before the end of this month.
Great. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. Our last item on this evening's agenda is to review and file the bi-monthly code enforcement activity report. If there's any questions or comments on that, seeing none, we'll file those. And We have no miscellaneous business tonight. We have one more item to take care of. Alderman Goodman,
I move to adjourn.
Second.
motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you and good evening.